And we don't need we don't use the AI.
No.
No. Okay. So, all right, I've got the recording on and um, I've got 5 people in the waiting room. So if you guys are
Yeah,
all set, I'll start letting in and then we'll probably it's only like 10:58, so I'll probably give it a couple more minutes.
absolutely.
Right. Morning, everyone. We're going to give it a couple minutes to let people join in. It's good to see everyone.
Let's see. I'm in I'm in coastal New Hampshire. We're up to 45 already and it was 50 yesterday. What are you guys sitting at? Is it warm out there too?
41, 41. Yeah, it
41,
feels
yeah.
like March when I walked out the door. It felt like spring.
Right now.
It's a tease. Yeah. But welcome, everyone. People are still joining, so we'll give it like another minute. All right. Did you get everybody? Yeah. All right. Well, welcome everyone on this kind of weird, not really winter feeling day. um, and we're so happy to have Andrew Walker and Sydney Wickman from Weston and Sampson here with us today to talk about the work that they've been doing on the regional flood model for the Deerfield River watershed and run through some of the scenarios that they've been able to do with the model so far. And we can have a discussion about the model itself, how the model can be used by the Resilient DRW Coalition. So we're really happy to welcome them. And what I'd like to do, just to give Andy and Sydney a sense of who the audience is, because I know all of you guys, all of you people. I'm just going to call on you as I see you on my screen and ask you just to introduce yourself and share like what board, committee, etc., town that or group agency that you're representing. So I will start with Andrea Santos.
Um, Hi, I'm Andrea Santos. I'm on the Charlemont Conservation Commission.
Thank you. Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Ness from Deerfield, and I am chair of our MVP committee and as well as chair of the Franklin Conservation District and on the MACD board.
Thank you, Carolyn. Michael left.
There we go. Yeah, Former director of MACD, independent consultant. I live in Chesterfield, but have done a lot of work, some of it with Carolyn in the Franklin Conservation District, some with the Connecticut River Conservancy in the Deerfield River watershed, which is near and dear to me.
Great. Thank you, Michael. John Lepore.
Good morning, everyone. John Lepore, Berniston Planning Board, and whatever else we can do in Berniston to make things work. And I'm also a restoration ecologist.
Thanks, John. Becky.
Hi, I'm Becky Budd. I'm the Restoration Program Manager at Connecticut River Conservancy.
Thank you. Star.
Hello, I'm Star Atkinson. I'm the secretary to the boards in Charlemont.
Thanks, Star. Pat.
Pat Conlon, Buckland Conservation Commission, also a licensed forester.
Thank you, Pat. Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I am from Charlemont and I've been involved with helping out in the river in various ways over the years.
Wonderful. Thank you. Nick.
Hi, Field Geology Services. I'm a fluvial geomorphologist working in Western Mass.
Thanks, Nick. Janet.
Janet Shays from Conway, I'm chair of the Open Space Committee. We work with FERCOG and Nick wonderfully for several projects. And we've had lots of flooding issues. I'm also a founder of the Friends of the South River.
Thank you, Janet. Rob.
Good morning. I'm Rob Vandekar. I'm with Mass DP, environmental analyst out of the Western Regional Office.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Robert.
Hi, Robert Cherdak, Ashfield Planning Board.
Thank you. Jessica.
Hello, I'm Jessica Siegel with the City of Greenfield Conservation Agents.
Thanks, Jessica. Erin.
I am Erin Rogers. I'm a program manager with Trout Unlimited.
Thanks, Erin. And Carrie.
I'm Carrie Banks, a capacity building branch manager with the Division of Ecological Restoration, and we're in the Department of Fish and Game.
Thanks, Carrie. I think I got everyone. So thank you for that. And I'll turn it over to Andrew and Sydney and they can introduce themselves.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the introductions. I think I saw many of you back in September, but it's nice to see you again, and thanks for the reminders. Again, I'm Andrew Walker at Weston and Sampson. I'm a senior team leader. We have a team of a number of hydrologists and engineers that love doing flood studies. And so we've been hard at work on this one. And it's fun to be working in the Deerfield again. When I was right out of college 20 years ago, my very first hydraulic model was the Deerfield River, and four of the hydropower dams on it. So very excited to be coming full circle. And actually, I've been telling Sydney this for months, and you'll see it yourself on some of the slides. But this is the best model I've been part of that I can remember. The most accurate. It's super exciting for me in a number of ways. Glad to be part of it. And maybe Sydney can introduce herself.
Yes, hi, I'm Sydney. I've been intimately familiar with this model for a couple months, but it's cool, very cool model. I'm actually an Arizona transplant, so getting used to just different circumstances of flooding that you guys have compared to Arizona. But I do enjoy, living in the Northeast now. So, yeah.
You got here as quick as you could.
Right. Well, it's a little cold, but mostly, yeah, I do like it out here.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Sydney. And why don't you share your screen and we can dive in.
Yeah, let me get that up. All right. You guys see the presenter view?
There we are. Yep. Why don't you advance to we'll just reintroduce folks to the project. You probably remember this from September, but if you've forgotten or weren't able to make that meeting, I'll give you a little bit of a refresher. Before we dive in, just real quick, we've done introductions. Sydney in a few minutes is going to talk about development of the model and what all went into that. She's going to talk about how the model was calibrated and validated to make sure that it was accurate and we can trust the results coming out of it. And then she's going to talk about all the findings from the model of all the no action simulations we ran. So ran a number of simulations for both a present day climate and future climate, looking at smaller storms and more extreme storms. And a lot of really interesting findings have come out of that. And Sydney will share that as well. I'll do my best to talk about some of the nature-based solutions that we'll be looking at over the next few months as we work towards the end of this project on June 30th. And then I'll finish it off by talking a little bit about that upcoming work as some of the specific things we'll be doing. All right. If you can, yeah, one more would be great. There we go. So just a refresher for folks or folks that missed the September meeting. Big picture, what are we doing here? The core of this project, right, is to develop a watershed scale flood model, a regional model that encompasses the entire watershed. Sydney will speak to this, but it's not even just the Massachusetts portion, right? This is funded through Massachusetts, MVP grants, but it's important to account for all the flows coming out of Vermont, which is half the watershed. So it's a full watershed model, and it's a balancing act between building a model that can run in a reasonable amount of time. This one takes about 2 days to run, 51 hours to run a single simulation, so it's quite hefty. But also, we wanted to add enough detail into the model so it would make meaningful results that are meaningful to you and you can work with. So we'll use this model to assess the present and future flood risk, and then we hope to work with FERCog and you all to look at some solutions or strategies to help mitigate that flood risk. We'll be using the model specifically to evaluate some of those strategies, and we'll talk about different scales, but there'll be, watershed-wide or large-scale projects that will have important flood reduction benefits for multiple communities. And we will also be looking at some smaller projects, some nature-based solutions in particular, that might improve flooding in more localized areas. And of course, the model can be used in the future by you all to look at all manner of solutions, all different scales of solutions. And it doesn't have to end here. And we'll be working with FERCog over the next couple months and with you all to identify some of the solutions to be evaluated as part of this project, prioritizing them, right? Coming up with all the projects that might be evaluated and prioritizing them, picking up to 6 of them, and then using the model to evaluate them. Like I said, it doesn't have to end there, but that's what this project will do. And then hopefully the work that's being done in this project and all the other great projects I know you all are working on, right? The ultimate goal is to improve public safety, prepare for emergencies. 100-year storms seem to come through every other year now, so it's to help you all be as prepared as possible for those. So that's just a sort of recap of what we're doing here. And next slide, I think we head to you, Sydney. Oh yeah, thank you. I won't belabor this, but just so you know what's coming, these are some of the key deliverables that are coming out of this project. Is the model itself is brand 2D flood model, and all the results that are coming out of this, you'll see in a few minutes. We looked at 6 different hypothetical design storms as well as 2 historical ones. And so you'll see what the output looks like in a minute, but all that output will be available in a GIS format or in Google Earth, whatever is convenient for you. The presentation today, obviously, just summarizing and presenting all of the hard work that Sydney's been doing. And there'll be a technical modeling memo as well, just to memorialize the methods and assumptions that went into this. And as I've alluded to, we're going to be looking at 6 high-level concepts, strategies, solutions, and using the model to understand what their benefits might be. And then we'll be doing a couple, presentations later on in the spring to present those concepts and what their benefits might be. And then we'll wrap everything up with a final report, I think spearheaded by FERCog, but with some heavy assistance from Weston and Sampson, of course, just to sort of tie a bow around everything. So those are the things you can expect in the months to come. All right. Take it away, Sydney.
Cool, thank you. And I think I just want to say we're definitely going to be pausing after each section. So I think we're hoping if everyone could just like write down any questions, and we'll definitely pause. We can go back to anything that anyone has any questions about. So just to do a straight shot through each section at least. But yeah, here is the model development slide. So what's basically been happening in those last couple months with developing the watershed model. So first of all, here is just again kind of an overview of our watershed delineated in black there, around 663 total square miles, pretty much half and half split between Vermont and Massachusetts. We do handle each side differently. So on the Vermont side, again, we're mostly concerned with representing flows from major reservoirs that are entering into our Massachusetts side. And then on the Massachusetts side, we are representing flooding and flood effects that can be seen in the streams and in the surrounding floodplain. As you can see, we're covering a lot of area in this model. So kind of to give you a spatial representation of kind of what's going on, we have 59 dams and those little red dots kind of spread throughout the model. Various sources of information for all of the dams. One was the field collected data, which was that field effort performed last summer by the Weston and Sampson employees as well as FERCog staff. And then I know we had some additional follow-up by FERCog staff done to get, as much data as we could for the model. We also have the FERC documentation for those large dams in the upper watershed, inspection reports for dams, hydraulic reports, emergency action plans, and then preliminary FIS or flood insurance studies done for the different streams. Moving into the crossings, again, a lot of crossings, about 358 is what we have counted for in the model. Again, coming from field data, some NAC collected data, which is more for stream crossing data. Mass DOT, again, the preliminary FIS. We had a couple of previous models, such as the USGS flood inundation maps that were done for a portion of the Deerfield. And also on the Vermont side, we had some bridge inspection reports that came out of this VTrans website. So definitely use many different sources of information for the crossings as well. And then a little section of storm drain. So this is all basically in the Greenfield area. And we did determine this as storm drains that have a diameter greater than 2 feet. So that's what's represented in the pink there. Again, we had, of course, field data for this as well. The Greenfield Drainage GIS database was shared with us. So that was helpful, of course, and some engineering drawings for some key crossings were also incorporated. And then zooming back out to the streams, there is around 65 miles of the main Deerfield River delineated, and then 200 miles of its various tributaries that you can see here. So we did have to make some selections for which streams to model explicitly. And so we mostly focused around streams with large ponds on it, large wetlands, any stream with a significant hazard dam specifically, as significant hazard dams are larger, more likely to hold back more water and have effects downstream that we would want to model accurately. Any streams that were close to critical infrastructure, hospitals, schools, police departments, stuff along those lines that would be important to know if they experience flooding, and also any streams that were mapped by FEMA previously and any flood insurance studies we wanted to include. So what does it mean to say we incorporated all of these dams, crossings, and streams? So kind of zooming into what the model is, we're representing all of the, again, crossings, dams, streams, and pipes with these one-dimensional conduits, which you can see on those yellow sections on the image. And then we split up those conduits with those blue junctions so that we could represent changes in the stream geometry. We can represent if there's a different slope, or to represent when a crossing or a dam is present. So on that, in the bottom of the image, you can see we have a crossing split out, which is a 50-foot by 50-foot crossing that is underneath a railroad. So we can represent water flowing through that. And then going back to the streams, we decided to split the stream segments into 500-foot long increments. And we did this, again, so we can accurately show the changes in the stream, but also to better connect to our 2D floodplain. Since once our water levels become higher than our defined stream channel that we have defined, that's when we will see flooding through our junctions into the floodplain. So we want to make sure we have a lot of areas where the flooding can get into our floodplain. So what is our 2D floodplain? So we call it a two-dimensional mesh that we have overlaid on top of the land surface to capture flooding that happens outside of our defined channel banks. So that's what we showed in the previous game with those yellow conduits. And the 2D mesh is based upon the LiDAR elevation data that is available for the region. As you can see, it's definitely centered around anywhere we expected to see flooding from our defined channels. And we have about 35 square miles of mesh. And so again, what exactly is the mesh? It is made up of these hexagonal cells, which you can see here. And we actually have about 150,000 2D cells, which is the most we've ever done in a model before, which is impressive.
It's about 2 times the size of the Charles and Neponset models. So we're done under similar grant programs.
Yes. So again, these are all these different little hexagonal cells. They range in diameter size from 50 to 250 feet. The reason for this is not everywhere is the same. Some areas have more complexity, such as smaller stream channels. Maybe the slope is changing a lot. Maybe it's close to buildings, and we want to get a better idea of how much flooding is happening at a smaller scale. So every 50 feet, we want to see if there's a change in flooding depths. Versus if we get to some floodplains or bigger rivers or kind of flatter areas, we can assume the flooding is going to be pretty static across a larger area. So that river on the right-hand side of the screen, we have it at 250 feet because it's pretty much going to be at that same elevation for that larger cell size. And then lastly, we have our subcatchments. So this is how we get the rainfall runoff to actually get into our river stream conduits, which then eventually flood into our 2D mesh. So it all starts at the subcatchments, which we have 549. So we have these defined for each pond, wetland, dam, crossing, or confluence. And it's defined as any area upstream of these different items. And if water fell on the land, it would eventually drain to that defined pond, wetland, dam, crossing. So it definitely varies in size depending on what exists in the area. As you can see on the Vermont side, definitely larger since we're concerned with larger reservoirs and dams in that area. And just a couple fast facts. It's about 1.7 average impervious percentage is what we were seeing. Obviously, in the Deerfield and Greenfield areas, they are going to have much higher percentages for their specific subcatchments, but on the whole, it is about 1.7%. And about 21% average slope seen across the watershed. So that's kind of the water or model development section. So I just want to see if there's any questions about what was previously shown just now.
So I think we're a small enough group that if you do have a question, just unmute yourself. I mean, I will, or if you wanted to raise your hand. But Sydney, I don't see any
Thank
raised
you.
hands. Oh, here we
Yes,
go.
thank you. Thank you. I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
And if folks think of questions later, they have questions about how the model was developed once they see some of the outputs, don't be afraid to ask questions about that later.
Charlie, did you have something you wanted to say? You came off mute, or did you want to mute yourself?
No, I was just trying to mute myself.
Okay, we'll do it for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I guess I'll continue into the calibration and validation then. So just showed you all the components that are going into this model, and now we're kind of analyzing the outputs. So this is how we can support that the model is producing accurate results for any rainfall design event that we will want to simulate in the future. And so the way we support that is by running an actual historical rainfall event through the model and comparing our model's simulated flows to the recorded observed flow data. And the purpose of this, as you can see here, it's to iteratively model or iteratively edit the model input parameters. And so we can better accurately reproduce the observed conditions from the historical event. So for this model, the largest rain event that had the most available flow data was the July 2023 flood event. We had about 3 to 6 inches that fell within the watershed over 24 hours, and we used this rainfall distribution that you can see on the right here to model temporally how the rain fell in this time frame. So how did we get to that distribution? We looked at a number of different sources. One was using the nearby precipitation gauges on the left image. So those 5 gauges are the closest gauges to the watershed that have sub-hourly rainfall data, which was very important because we want to make sure we're trying to mimic the historical rainfall event as close as possible. So we can't go with any like daily data for that or even above hourly. We really wanted to get sub-hourly data to get it as accurate to real historical events. So we were using those gauges. However, as we progressed, we noticed that the total rainfall recorded by them was significantly less than what we expected in our watershed. And we attribute this to the fact that, there are mountainous ranges, the gauges are outside of the watershed, so maybe due to topographic changes, they did receive less rainfall than the actual watershed. So to combat this, we turned to a NOAA product that recorded daily rainfall totals in a gridded format that you can see on the right image. And so that grid is the summed up rainfall that fell during the days of the July 2023 event. And so now we can get a spatial distribution of total rainfall that fell in the watershed and then apply the sub-hourly time distribution from the gauges. So we can get the closest we can to simulating the actual rainfall from the July 2023 event. So now we have our rainfall data. We can talk about the discharge data. So the discharge data or flow data that is available to us comes at a 15-minute interval from 5 USGS gauges within the watershed. 2 are on the Deerfield River at Charlemont and West Deerfield, and 3 are on main tributaries, the North, South, and Green River. So these USGS gauges can provide the historical observed flow over time, which is the hydrograph, which can give to us the peak discharge that passed through that gauge in cubic feet per second, as well as the total volume that passed through that gauge. We measure that in million gallons. And from this, we were able to compare our simulated model flows at each of those 5 locations, compare them to the USGS flows. And to give you kind of a brief preview, we were able to get all 5 locations to get our model to simulate flows within EPA recommended tolerances compared to the historical event. So very happy about that. So to zoom in to a couple of them or into each location. Again, we're trying to show everyone this to show how similar our outputted model flows are to an actual historical event so that we can trust our model outputs for future, simulated rainfalls or to show how much mitigation strategies could improve flooding in the area. So this is kind of just a proof of concept for the watershed. So for this one on the left, we're showing every model component that's upstream of the Charlemont gauge. And that's everything that's kind of contributing to our model output flows. So the gray line is the model simulated flows. The black is the USGS historical observed data. Now, as you can see, we're pretty close, 2% off the peak, 4% off in the total runoff volume, which is the area underneath the 2 lines. So very close here. Kind of the same idea we kind of saw at each location. We get a very similar shape, pretty similar total peak and total runoff volume looking at. This is the North River model components, so everything upstream of that gauge. That was the outputs we were getting on our gray line versus the USGS black line. Again, South River, this was like our steepest, flashiest watershed area. And again, we were able to get a very similar shape, very similar volume and peak flow. This is the Green River. Here's the hydrograph for the Green River. It is our least precise in terms of the total runoff volume, but it is still within the recommended EPA tolerances. Part of this is probably due to a large portion of the upstream area is located in Vermont, represented by that yellow conduit there. And we were mostly concerned with just getting flows to the Massachusetts side, not figuring out flooding in Vermont. So that area might not be as precise. However, the peaks that we observe still very similar. And the area where our gray line rises above the black line happens after the peak. So this probably is not affecting the peak flood levels and the peak impacts that we would be seeing from the event here. So our peak is still fairly accurate. And lastly, this is the West Deerfield stream gauge, as well as the rest of the model that eventually discharges into the Connecticut River. And we're pretty pleased with this output, since this is taking in all of the upstream data that we just showed you guys, and it is mimicking the historical observed data very well, 2 and 1% there.
And he's being modest. This is downstream of all the other gauges, and to see that we're 1-2% off, and to see the curve match USGS data so well, we're extraordinarily pleased. This is I've never been part of a modeling effort that was this well matched. We couldn't be more pleased. Kudos to Sydney.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, yes. So we can say we calibrated to that design or to that historical event very well. But now we want to confirm that our model can reproduce this accuracy in other events. So we have to run a validation rainfall event to see if the edits we made during the calibration phase are appropriate for a storm event with a different total rainfall and a different, time distribution of rainfall. So for that, we chose Tropical Storm Irene, which had 5 to 8 inches of rainfall that fell. And I know originally this was going to be our calibration event, but as we dug into the data more, the storm was actually so large that it wiped out most of the gauges during the event. So we only have continuous flow data for the South River. However, we still do have point measurements that were taken in the field, as well as river stage or river water or water depth data that we can compare against that was recorded at the gauges. So we kind of just pulled out a few examples to show. On the left, for example, is the West Deerfield Irene flow. You can see the black historical data kind of fizzles out in the middle of the storm, but they do have those orange field measurements that were taken. And again, we can see our model magnitude, the magnitude of our flow matches fairly similarly. For the South River, this is, again, the only one with continuous flow data. We get, again, a very similar shape to the South River, so it's still within EPA tolerances. Another example here, the North River flow on the left. Again, continuous data fizzles out. We do have that field point to compare against. And then as an example, just to show, we were checking other pieces of information. The water depth data was continuously recorded at the North River, and so we could compare our water depth data as well at that location and see that the shapes and magnitude very similar again. And so then we could say we've calibrated and validated the model, and then we could go into some design storm events. So I guess wanted to check back if there are any questions about the calibration and validation of the model.
Hey there, Carolyn.
I was on the select board when we had Irene, and one of the things that complicated the Irene situation was the release. The Bear Swamp released, and then Harriman Dam had to release. And it really was, we thought the storm had gone by, and it really was a wall of water coming down. So it's a little bit of Irene is not really a good calibration storm because it was really distorted by the releases. the July 23rd, 23 storms were several over a period of time. I mean, it started literally the first week of July and went right through the end. So you had, in both cases, you had super saturated soil. So the runoff was more, because that's what happened with Irene too. But there was no release, and so I think that data or those data points are probably more accurate than the Irene one. Um, it just Irene was really I think hopefully we've corrected some of that stuff now, but we don't know.
Yeah, those are some interesting points, Carolyn. So Cindy did a deep dive into the documentation for the hydropower dams there, and so she's incorporated their outlets and their operations into both calibration and validation models, and so we're capturing those releases in the model, and I think that's in large part why we're able to reproduce stream flow and stage measurements that were observed during Irene in particular, and to reproduce them so accurately. So thank you for bringing it up. We didn't mention that, didn't want to complicate it, but we are capturing those.
Yeah, no, that was a very that was a severe event because of
Yeah,
the releases.
Absolutely.
What we do anecdotally is if Charlemont gauge is between 9 and 10,000 CFS, then that means it's close to the road level at the Stillwater Bridge in West Deerfield. So that's when that
And you get
equates to
nervous.
about 27,000 to 30,000 CFS at our gauge. And that's when we start, doing emergency preparedness kind of actions.
That's great. You had also mentioned sort of what's called antecedent moisture conditions, right? If it's been raining on and off, or significant rain on and off, in the week, 2 week, month leading up to a significant storm event, it sort of saturates the soil. The soil can't infiltrate or store as much of the runoff when you have that big event. And so we took some pains to look back at the rainfall and stream flow records before both of these historical events to make sure that we were accurately representing those antecedent soil moisture conditions. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think in September, you had also brought up the significant effect of the Connecticut River stage, right?
Yes.
If there's a huge storm in northern New Hampshire, but no rain in the Deerfield, you could still see some flooding as the Connecticut River responds and rises and backs into the Deerfield. And so we remembered that, and we made sure to define the downstream boundary of the model using the Connecticut River stage data that was recorded really right at the confluence.
Perfect.
So we took that into consideration as well.
I really appreciate that, because that if the Connecticut isn't involved, it just literally whooshes out. And we have a lot more erosion and you have velocity involved. But when the Connecticut is involved in the event, say in a widespread like Irene kind of scenario that is more towards the east than it was, we would have had slower kind of inundation kind of flooding versus, as it backs up, the river doesn't dump. So yeah, it's kind of complicated, and because of the July 23 flooding, the South River has changed too quite a bit. And but I think you captured that by modeling with your modeling. It appears that you did, but it has definitely changed between Irene and the 23 flooding.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, thank you, Carolyn, for those questions and the clarifications. Thank you, Andy. I know Michael left also. Michael, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, and I guess it's kind of related to what you were just talking about. First of all, I thought like the accuracy seems super impressive of your modeling. But yeah, I was thinking like this is in terms of, the event, but then what about the impact over the days that follow based on what's moving down from upstream impact?
Yeah.
where you know what I mean? The rainfall and the flow may not initially have been as high lower down, but it's coming. And is
Yeah.
that just not part of what this, I mean, is looking at, or it's just a phenomenon, basically?
Yes. Sydney, can you go back to a slide that shows the recession of those floodwaters? With that, we absolutely have that in mind. This is a great one. You can see, yes, the rain only fell for about 24 hours, but we made sure that to run the model for at least 3 days. And so the target was we wanted to run the model long enough so that the river flow had a chance to recede to about 10% of the peak flow. So we really captured that. And right, I've said it before, we couldn't be more pleased, right? Not only does the model capture that rising limb, that initial response to rainfall, it captures that peak quite well, the peak impacts that the communities are experiencing, but it also captures that receding limb, that recession of the floodwater. So this model can be used to understand not only sort of the peak impacts, but also the durations of those impacts, right? Yes, this bridge is overtopped by 1.5 feet, but is it for 15 minutes? And that's not a significant, right? There might be some structural issues, but give it a half an hour and fire trucks and ambulances can cross again. Or is this going to be out of commission for a day and a half? And, communities need to drive 10 miles around to get to the other side. So the model, we think, captures that sort of those longer term views and can be useful in that way.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for bringing it up.
I just had one other comment I probably forgot was in drought conditions, if we've had extended drought a couple of times recently, and as a result, the where you have supersaturated soil, it doesn't absorb. Also, in these extreme drought situations, we have soil that doesn't absorb. So you have more runoff in following a drought condition, just as much as you have supersaturated soil. It's a phenomena that we realized after having run through the drought from in 2024 into 25, and also prior to that, I'm trying to think the year. Some of the years run together, but I think it was 18 or 19. I'm not sure. We had a drought, a pretty severe drought, and it was same kind of conditions. When you had any rainfall, you had excessive runoff.
Yes, we saw that as well. There was one storm we looked at. Was it Irene, Sydney? I think we had to increase the soil saturation prior to the event to mimic exactly that. And we're looking back at the historical rainfall, like, geez, it hasn't rained in forever before this event. Initially you might think you want to lower that initial saturation, but in fact, we increased it a little bit to capture exactly that effect. Great. Any other questions about the model development or calibration effort? Okay. Why don't we dive into the no action results?
Yes. So now that we did the calibration and validation, we ran some design storms under the existing conditions to see what outputs we would get as preliminary results. So kind of a recap again on our future increase in precipitation that we expect. This graph is showing the 24-hour design storm projections that we have for this watershed. And so on the present day, you can see on that top green line that our 500-year storm and that dark bar, as we bring it across, that in the year 2050, that could be projected to be a 100-year storm. And then that lower green line, the 25-year storm of the present, bring it across, could be a 10-year storm by 2030 and a 5-year storm by 2070. So this is kind of reiterating again that in the future, these more intense rainfall events that don't happen as often, we can start to expect them to happen more often. So we want to design to that. So these are the specific design storms that we chose to run through the model. The 2, 10, and 100-year reoccurrence interval. Again, these are all 24-hour storm durations. And so we ran this for the present day and also the 2070 future conditions. The reason we chose the 2 and the 10 years are because these are common events that cities and infrastructure will have to deal with. And many mitigation strategies like green or gray infrastructure are usually targeted to reducing flooding in the 2 and the 10 year. We did also want to model the 100 years since it is a FEMA regulated event and it can show us the worst possible flooding effects that could occur. For the present conditions, we use the NOAA Atlas 14 projections for the 3 recurrence intervals. And then for the future, we went with a mix between NOAA++ and the 2022 Northeastern United States intensity, duration, frequency curves, which are projections that feed into the resilient mass design tool, if anyone's familiar with that. So the reason we did this is we wanted a good spread of rainfall events. So as you can see, they all vary quite nicely between each other. We don't want to run an event that's very similar to another one because we're just going to kind of get repeated flooding outcomes. Additionally, the NOAA++ projections have been used in other projects, I believe, in the watershed. And then for the 100-year, the IDF curve projection is more conservative, being 9.7 inches instead of 9.3 that NOAA++ projects. So we wanted to go with a more conservative value for that 100-year future design storm. It's kind of some overview of results on the watershed scale. So what's happening as we ran those different design events through it. As you can see on the left, we have our baseline or present day conditions, those 3 columns. The right 3 columns have our 2070 outputs, and we have the 2, 10, and 100-year represented. So for example, on the left, the purple, we expect the total runoff volume we can see from all of the subcatchments to be about 57,000 million gallons for the 100-year, present day. And as we move into the 100-year future, it could go up to 90,000 is what our model projects, 91,000 million gallons, which is an increase of 59% in terms of total runoff the watershed could be experiencing. So that's kind of just what we wanted to show here, preliminary results. The table below kind of just mimics what the graph is showing. Kind of the same story here. We wanted to show the inundated area. So this is showing all of the 2D cells that have a water depth greater than 1/10 of a foot. We kind of summed those up for all of those flooded 2D cells. And as you can see, example for the 100-year, previously the 100-year present has 9,000 acres of flooded area. And as we move into the future 2070 event, that could go up to 10,000 acres. So an increase of 14% in inundated area is what our model is projecting. And again, the tabular repeats the graph there. And so now we have the watershed scale. We have a couple specific areas that we wanted to just kind of zoom into just to get an idea of what these results actually would look like for everyone. So we have one pulled out. Yeah.
Sydney, you've got plenty of time too, so feel free to go through several of them.
Okay, great. So yeah, we basically kind of zoomed into one area in each of the different cities just to get an idea, or each of the towns. So this is for Charlemont. We're comparing the present day 100-year flow, or the inundated area caused by the flow, and the future 100-year inundated area. And we try to kind of pull out some key differences, such as the new flooding areas. You can see on the right image along Main Street, we're having more flooding kind of hitting into that main road in Charlemont. We also have some worsened flooding along the Bowesver Brook that is, going into the Deerfield River. And then we tried to pull out some key critical infrastructure. For example, there's a fire station in that top right corner. Still sees flooding in the present day 100-year, but definitely gets to see worse flooding as we move into the 2070 100-year conditions. So here's another example we pulled out for Conway. Again, these are all going to be comparing the 100 years present to future. Definitely worsened areas, again, along Main Street, and that police department, which on the left maybe sees a 1/2 foot of flooding. Our model is simulating that it could see up to 1 to 2 feet of flooding in the 2070 conditions. So this is, again, something that we could maybe plan around, or we can really consider as we move through mitigation strategies that we'll get to. Here's another example, kind of, self-explanatory again. This is Shelburne Falls. We have a school and a fire station. The fire station is kind of note here since it doesn't see any flooding in the present day 100-year, and then it does see some flooding in the future 100-year. So again, it's kind of interesting to get this first look of what we could see changes in different key areas or key downtown areas. Here's a little snap of Buckland. Again, it's kind of a fire station there. Definitely see some worsened flooding along the river. It's a little bit of new flooding. This one definitely shows a lot of worsened flooding areas. And then our graph, again, is just showing greater than 3 feet. But, there's definitely more changes and variation within that. That's not shown in our symbology, just for simplicity. Same story here's for Coleraine. Kind of pointed out the school and the fire station there, and definitely worsened flooding in that main downtown area of Coleraine. And then we do have this tributary here. There's 2 dams just upstream, so that's why this tributary was included. So again, that went into our selection criteria. So like, why would we include an unnamed tributary? Well, it does have 2 dams on it, so that went into that. Of course, Deerfield, this kind of goes into the effect of showing that we did consider the Connecticut stage data, because a lot of this is definitely filled up due to the influence of the Connecticut River here. It's kind of a bowl that just gets filled up that the Deerfield runoff just kind of contributes to. But you can definitely see, of course, lots of worsened floodings. There's definitely more critical infrastructure here. I just pulled out, I know for sure there's 2 schools there, but we'll definitely, no, there is definitely a critical infrastructure that could be affected. Greenfield, these are more storm drain pipes. So was what you're seeing here. These aren't, channels. These are storm drains that, have flooding that we observed kind of coming out the top. They surcharge. That's where most of the flooding is coming from. And you can obviously see new flooding around the school, just increased flooding around the homes. So yeah, definitely interesting to get a first look at that. Another one for Layden. This is more towards the upper ends of the watershed. And so you can kind of see there's a new flow path on the top right, which is interesting to see. And again, some new and worsened flooding areas. Same story over and over. Pulled out a little bit for Ashfield. And then for Bernardston, as you can see, our watershed kind of captures a sliver of it, so it doesn't actually have the main town of Bernardston in there. So right now we have that part of the watershed represented by a subcatchment, since there's not really critical infrastructure that we observed along a stream path over there, but we still can pull out results from the subcatchment in light green there, such as, the peak runoff is increasing by 78% between the 200-year events, and then the total runoff volume is increasing by, we have 56% from the present to future 100-year rainfall event. It's kind of the examples we have to show for you right now as, preliminary results.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, one of the final deliverables will be a GIS compatible data or a Google Earth KMZ file, so that you can zoom in your respective communities. We just showed some screenshots from primarily downtown areas, but you can zoom in anywhere in your community and look at what the model output is for those 6 hypothetical design storms or the 2 historical events.
I guess any questions about the preliminary results, design storm results? If not, I think it's back to Andy now.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm a hydrologist. My area of expertise is modeling, developing these surface water models. I know enough about nature-based solutions to be dangerous. So I'm going to speak about the nature-based solutions. Normally, we would have had we've got 2 or 3 colleagues that have been hard at work on starting to look at nature-based solutions in your watershed. One of them recently moved to Hawaii, so this meeting is a little bit too early for her. And the other 2 are in an all-day training program. So you're stuck with me. So I'll do my best here. And if you have questions that we can't answer, we'll surely jot them down and track down those answers for you. But I'll do my best. And probably most folks on the call here are familiar with nature-based solutions. So I'll give a quick recap for those that want to learn a little bit more. But at the heart of it, nature-based solutions are intended to work with natural processes rather than against them. Right? They're intended to use vegetation and soil and natural hydrology to manage stormwater where it falls instead of relying solely on pipes and concrete. They're generally designed to tackle multiple challenges simultaneously, right? Not just upsizing a pipe, getting more water out of the way as quick as you can, but instead, they reduce flood risk, yes, but they can also filter pollutants and cool heat islands and support wildlife habitat, capture carbon, and they can enhance or create new recreational opportunities. They can increase property values and more. They come loaded with a number of important co-benefits. And when they're designed properly, nature-based solutions can be cost-effective investments that can pay dividends across environmental, social, and economic dimensions. The goals for the nature-based solutions assessment that's part of this project is to identify, and we've already started on this process, and we'll continue to, now that the model's developed and we have outputs from the model, we're really going to transition to looking at potential nature-based solutions in your watershed. But we're going to be looking across multiple scales, including, and I'll talk about each one in turn, but that ranges from watershed-wide strategies that benefit the entire Deerfield system to large, high-impact projects that can store or infiltrate significant stormwater volumes. But also, as I mentioned a little earlier, smaller ones designed to produce benefits on a more local scale, whether it's nuisance flooding or a particular tributary system. So we're going to be looking at a wide range of scales, but regardless of scale, we'll be looking for strategies or solutions that are implementable, not just good in theory, but actually permittable and constructible. We'll be looking for opportunities that are eligible for grant funding, right? That will show well there. And that will also provide some of those, really significant co-benefits to communities, ecosystems, and the climate. I'll speak to the watershed-wide or catchment-wide strategies first. The idea here is that these are implemented across the whole watershed, and when they're done in that way, they can sort of add up incrementally and make a difference, not just in the communities where they're implemented, but their downstream neighbors as well. And we have found in doing this type of project in a number of watersheds, large watersheds in Massachusetts, it really does take a regional effort, and we find that to be true here as well. Here are some examples of watershed scale strategies. One is this sort of blanket community-wide reduction in impervious surfaces. Now, obviously, that's much more relevant to a watershed like the Charles than it is to the Deerfield, with a little under 2% impervious cover. But there are specific subcatchments or subbasins in the watershed that would benefit from reduction in impervious surfaces, or at least a reduction in the effective impervious surfaces, right? Disconnecting them from storm drains, or capturing the runoff from them and infiltrating it, or retaining it so it doesn't get dumped immediately into a surface water body. So there may be specific subcatchments in the watershed where impervious surface reductions make sense. Kind of on a related note, rain barrel program is a common way to implement those impervious surface reductions, right? You're capturing runoff from the impervious rooftops, holding it in a rain barrel, And it comes with a number of co-benefits. There's a storage aspect. But there's also, right, rooftops tend to be warm, so you can hold warm water, keep it from getting into the streams, and so there's water quality benefits there as well. A final example would be updates to bylaws or ordinances. We've worked with many communities on this, but the idea is let developers do the work for you. So when there's a new development or when there's a redevelopment, a significant redevelopment, don't just require that that development keeps runoff from the property at current levels, as is required by the Massachusetts stormwater framework, but go above and beyond that. Require them to store a certain depth of runoff and sort of use that process over many years, decades, to sort of turn back the clock, so that if hundreds of development or redevelopment projects and each one holds back more runoff than baseline condition, that will add up and make significant benefits for flooding near the site and downstream. So those are some of the watershed or catchment-wide strategies that we'll be considering. We'll also be looking at large-scale solutions or individual projects. These are, and many of these I know that you communities you're already interested in or actively pursuing. And I know you have active projects or concepts, and we've been learning about those the last couple of months. Thank you to you and to FERCOG for passing that information on. One example of a large-scale solution would be a floodplain restoration or a dam removal. Right, so these dam removal, for instance, can lower the floodplain upstream of the dam, and sometimes that provides a benefit to the flooded infrastructure and buildings around the impoundment or upstream of the impoundment. Sometimes a partial removal is an option as well, where you sort of put a cut in the dam, you remove the impoundment so that it's dry or like a wetland or marsh system during most conditions. But when there's a significant storm event, there's still enough of the dam that the water backs up, and so you end up having a lower peak flooding upstream of the dam. So there's a benefit there, but you still retain some protection and reduce flooding downstream by leaving some of the dam in place. So there's large-scale solutions like that, or floodplain restoration, or sort of reconnecting a stream to its natural floodplain. Sometimes streams are separated from their floodplain through development, a common one, and we've seen a couple of these in your watershed. Or railroad embankments tend to cut off rivers from their floodplains. So restoring that connection where possible, or otherwise expanding the floodplain and its capacity. Looking at dry detention basins, so this is sort of kind of similar to a partial dam removal that I described, right? So dry detention basins, they're dry most of the time, but when it rains, they fill. So there's a storage capacity there. And they can also infiltrate the water. Rather than allowing it to run off, they can capture that first flush, infiltrate the water, and so there's water quality and temperature co-benefits there as well. Those can make nice projects. And then stream restoration is a bit of a blanket term, but there's all manner of stream restoration projects. I know there are some that are actively being looked at in the Deerfield and its tributaries already, but these might be things like slope stabilization, which are great projects for the health of the stream and its floodplain. These can also prevent banks slump that fill in the channel and cause a rise in flood levels. So those can be great, or just improving the sinuosity of a stream and its access to its floodplain through stream restoration projects. So we'll be looking at some of these as well. And then the last scale I'll describe are these medium or smaller scale solutions. These are really they tend to be site specific. They include things like floodable fields, right? Depressed areas, or installing berms around an existing field. It might just be a 6-inch, 12, 24 inches, whatever it is, just a little bit of a berm to contain water on a field, right? It might be a baseball field 360 days out of the year, but the other 5, it's allowed to fill with water and protects downstream areas. Swales, right? Swales are used for conveyance and sediment removal. They can also be good. They can also be good areas with size constraints, but they could be things like along parking lot medians or sidewalks along roadways, buffers in agricultural areas. So there's a lot of great opportunities for swales and bioswales as well. Bioretention basins and rain gardens. These can be on municipal land or private residential land. These are great projects that can be implemented in small spaces, and as more and more of them are constructed, the benefits really add up. Tree box filters, we're seeing the benefits of those. We're seeing more and more of these constructed. They can be used to, right? They don't have to interfere with a sidewalk. They can augment a sidewalk or a parking lot. But the tree box filters, one, they reduce heat in these paved areas, improve the aesthetics. But the trees can also, and the box that they sit in can also be used to reduce runoff and improve the water quality of runoff from these paved surfaces. Various subsurface infiltration systems, right? Different chamber technologies that get installed under parking lots or large impervious areas. They're designed to capture significant runoff volumes and then infiltrate them into the subsurface over time. Again, reducing flooding downstream and improving water quality. So some nice benefits. And the last type of project I'll mention are porous paving. There is a maintenance component to that, of course, which can be a turnoff, but porous paving really does come with some significant benefits, right? These are areas where open areas that they must remain paved, and can't be, that impervious surface can't be eliminated. You still need that parking lot at the school or the police station, but converting it to porous paving allows the runoff to infiltrate down through the pavement into a subsurface. And again, there's a little bit of storage there, and it also enhances the infiltration. And there's water quantity and quality benefits associated with that. So those are some of the types of projects, some of the types of nature-based solutions or watershed-wide strategies that we'll be looking at over the next couple of months. And as you see, they span a wide range of different scales. And we've already started to look at some of these, and we'll be kind of compiling a number of nature-based solution opportunities, and then working to prioritize them, which ones might provide the most benefit. We'll be doing that in a couple of ways. The first is by focusing on areas that you communities have given us feedback on, that are areas that are flood prone, right? So we've received this already. We're starting to look at this. There's a number of locations in the watershed where you all have noted, yes, this is an area that floods frequently. This is a problem location. And so part of the prioritization work will be trying to identify nature-based solution opportunities or strategies in the drainage areas to these problem areas, so that we can help FERCog and help you all start to address flooding in those problem areas. So that's one piece of the puzzle. The next piece is, we've also heard, as I've alluded to, we've heard about a lot of great potential projects that are already being considered in the watershed, whether these are priority or high risk stream crossings that were identified, or potential project locations that you all have identified, or priority conservation areas. So again, a lot of these sort of high priority sites have been identified, and we'll be kind of overlaying, right? We'll overlay the flood prone areas. We'll overlay these potential project locations, and to try to find up to 6 solutions or strategies to evaluate, to sort of conceptualize a little bit, and use the model to evaluate their benefits. And there's one other piece that we'll go into that process, and this is and this builds off the model outputs. We want to use the model. We want to use Sydney's sort of no action findings to help us prioritize some of these nature-based solutions or strategies, right? And this stems from the variability within the watershed, right? So what you see here are a couple of different maps of the watershed. It's broken up by Sydney's 546 subcatchments, and the fact is the watershed is not the same everywhere, right? The slope of those subcatchments changes dramatically. There are areas that are very flat, right? Down in the lower Deerfield and the Connecticut River valleys. These are areas with very low slope, and then there's more mountainous areas in the headwaters, or to the west there, right? So it's very different slope across the watershed, different impervious cover. There's areas with almost no impervious cover, and there's areas with greater than 30% impervious cover. Soil infiltration. There are parts of the watershed where rainfall infiltrates into the soil much more readily than others. And so every corner of the watershed is a little bit different. And so on the next slide, we see that those differences add up, and it means that runoff is generated differently in different corners of the watershed. Here you see a comparison of the volume of runoff between the 2070 100 year and the present day 100 year. And so you can see that on average is a 59% increase, as you saw in some of Sydney's slides earlier. But that doesn't mean it's experienced the same across the whole watershed. There are areas that experience only a 33% increase, and there's areas that increase by 66%, twice as much. So there's very much a variability in different corners of the watershed. And so that's sort of the third component, right? We'll be looking at areas you've noted as flood prone. We'll be looking at high priority project areas, but we'll also be overlaying that on the model results so that we can identify nature-based solutions that may have the greatest benefit, at least from a flood reduction perspective. So that's a nice transition to just a quick summary of the work that is coming up. So we've already started this, as you saw in the last two slides. We'll be using the existing model to identify catchments with the greatest increase in flooding. On the previous slide, you saw the greatest increase in runoff volume. That's one piece of the puzzle. But we'll also be looking at where are we seeing increases in the flooding extents and depths. Where are critical infrastructure being impacted disproportionately? We saw that in some of Sydney's sort of zoom ins to the individual towns, right? Not every town experienced the increase in flooding in the same sort of dramatic way with regard to critical infrastructure. So we'll be looking at that. We'll be working with FERCog to reach out to you communities. We'll be doing a survey of the types of nature-based solutions that you all would be most interested in. We want your feedback on that, absolutely. And then we'll kind of be combining all this, and we'll be doing this screening process of nature-based solutions. I've spoken to this, but we'll be reviewing those priority catchments, catchments where that are perhaps most suitable for a nature-based solution from a flood reduction perspective. We'll incorporate those model results and the priority locations and the public survey input into that screening process. And then we'll develop and prioritize up to 6 nature-based scenarios in those areas. And we'll use the model to simulate the potential flood reduction benefit of those great projects. And then we'll combine that. We'll flesh out these 6 scenarios, sort of a high-level concept for each, and speak to not only the flood reduction benefits shown by the model, but some of the other co-benefits as well. And so stay tuned for that. We'll have 1 or 2 presentations like this later in the spring, where we focus on those nature-based solutions and their benefits. Well, thanks for listening to us talk. Anybody have any questions about nature-based solutions or thought of something about the model they wanted to ask? I see Carolyn's hand up.
We're working along the Deerfield with putting buffers in under the CSP, the program under NRCS, to have them in conservation for at least 5 years. But one of the things that I think we're really interested in is working with Deerfield Academy that is entirely flood prone, maybe with their floodable fields. just wanted to throw that out there, that that's one of the things that we're thinking of, because, you know, you want to access the flood plain, but they have infrastructure in the floodplain. So what we're trying to do is figure out ways to work with them that they'd have more resilience in what they have there.
That's great.
And that is underway sort of already.
That's great. We have as a firm, we love collaborations with schools. They have large parcels. They tend to, well, your Deerfield's not, but they tend to be, you know, municipal land. So that can be easier. And a lot of impervious surfaces, and there's great educational and outreach opportunities. So it's a win-win-win. I see Jessica Siegel has a question.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to comment. I'm excited by all the nature-based solutions that you just reviewed, and I'm in Greenfield, so I'm especially excited about the kind of rain garden, stormwater infiltration. I forget what you called those, because if you recall, a lot of like the photo that you guys displayed in the presentation today was all the stormwater flooding, and just what that kind of solution might do for, you know, impacting the flooding in those areas for all the residents that have homes right along that. Anyway,
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing the model and how it changes things. So thank you so much for all your work.
We are too. Thank you, Jessica. Any other questions?
I was thinking back to what you said, Caroline, about the Deerfield River. I do know one of the schools I identified in that slide was Deerfield Academy. So for sure is seeing some flooding in that area.
Oh, Pat, did you?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know how to find the raise hand function here. I'm
That's
used to
okay.
Teams. So I'll do it the old fashioned way. So I want to echo my appreciation for developing this model. I'm in awe of models. I don't understand them. I am so thankful that you folks are dedicated to this. And that leads me to my first question, which hopefully is a simple one. When you were looking at rain gauges, why didn't you consider personal weather stations as a reliable data source?
Good question. And we had some questions about rainfall back in September. We have focused on sort of National Weather Service gauges. They meet certain sort of data quality standards, and so we were already seeing a great deal of variability in rainfall depths observed across the watershed. So we wanted to avoid having to decide whether, okay, are we seeing this variability because it actually occurred and, you know, it's a function of the topography, or is this a data quality issue? And right, there's different types of rain gauge equipment, and some of them are more or less prone to overestimating or underestimating. So we opted to use gauges that met a certain requirement, used a certain type of equipment, so there was less risk of bias.
Do you think for future planning, it would be something in our interest to get more localized, you know, high quality rain estimates, gauges?
Yeah, I think a number of communities will will have like a town gauge on the roof of the fire department or at the water treatment plant, or things like that. And you know what? It doesn't have to be the creme de la creme of rainfall gauges. So long as you're collecting data in a consistent way, and you can, even if you want to, kind of compare it to the National Weather Service gauges, just so you can understand what bias that equipment might have. So you know, if there's the gauge in orange, we're always like 25-30% less than them or more than them, so that you can always kind of make that comparison. Hey, Carolyn, I see your hand up.
I just wanted to say anecdotally, because of all the issues we've had with flooding and rainfall, we have I bought the same rain gauges for all of us, the select board and our emergency manager, our police chief, because we happen to be spread out the entire length of the town. I'm on the Greenfield border, and then we go right down to the police chief who is on the Whately border. And the difference in the rain amounts, every event, we take a picture of our rain gauges and we record it. And there's a tremendous difference between our 3 to 4 rain gauges that we monitor every rainstorm. And the idea is to have this historical data so that we can, claim money from the state or the feds or whatever better. But because it is always underestimated in our town, and it's very effective to have our own picture of our amounts, and we log it in, and it's logged in on every event. And I think it's going to be much more effective moving forward, truthfully.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that feedback, Carolyn. I didn't want to leave you, Pat. It sounded like you might have some additional questions.
Oh, out of curiosity, in terms of the nature-based solutions that you listed, in terms of like the Deerfield watershed context, which solution do you think has like the biggest bang for its buck?
Oh God. So I don't think there's any one solution. I think the biggest takeaways, and I don't know, in the last 10 years, in the last 5 to 10 years, as these types of grant funded projects have really gained traction. I think what I've personally learned the most, the key takeaways are, it's not one project. You need everyone, everywhere, all the time. You're not going to keep 27 flooding at baseline present day levels unless every corner of the watershed is doing their part to mitigate the increase in flooding. That's one key takeaway. The second is that what works in one community won't necessarily work in their neighboring community, or what works in one sub-watershed won't work in another. And that it's painful and intimidating to try to come up with a plan that will solve it all at once. But that if you can keep identifying projects that make a difference in this neighborhood or that intersection or that parking lot or that watershed, that's tributary. If you can keep aggressively looking for things that work on the local scale, it will add up to real meaningful change at the watershed scale. So I totally punted on your question, but I do believe that.
Well, I'm hoping that it's overly simplified, but of course it isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, rain barrels. Just rain barrels everywhere. Yeah.
If I may. So on that, yeah, everything everywhere, wherever the opportunity is, but also my understanding is that impact can be increased by solutions that are in a train that follow along a particular flow pattern.
Yep, that's true. And we've seen, we've seen communities will pick a targeted area. They'll pick a flood prone area with significant impacts to whether it's 24 residences or some critical infrastructure. They'll pick a target area and do exactly that, and look at implementing multiple solutions in series or in parallel that benefit that one area and make meaningful change. And communities, states, you name it, they don't have unlimited funds, and so I think part of the idea and part of what we try to incorporate into the screening process is prioritization, finding the projects, finding the areas where you can get the most bang for your buck. So starting with the low hanging fruit, starting with those most effective solutions. I think you can never go wrong doing that.
Right. Thanks.
Right. Any other questions? Okay.
Well, great. Thank you so very much Andrew and Sydney. That was really, really a wonderful presentation. And I also appreciate how well or how all the work that went into making the model be as representative as possible of the conditions in the watershed. And it's really exciting to see the scenarios that you ran and the calibration that was done that show kind of how well the model is representing what's happening in the watershed now and what we predict in the future. And I really appreciate all the questions and the input that people provided. And I think the big takeaway from today is kind of that theme that we've been talking about all along is thinking at the watershed scale, working together at the watershed scale, like opportunities for collaboration between the municipalities that share a watershed or even some of these smaller catchment areas. And that's going to be kind of one of the beautiful things about the model is that each town will be able to look at conditions within their town, but then also like what's happening with their neighbors that share a small watershed or a small catchment area. So yeah, I'm just really thrilled with the work to date. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
To Weston and Sampson. And we've got our marching orders for providing more input and information back to you, Andy and Sydney. And see a lot of clapping hands. And we had a comment in the chat too, just thanking you for the work and for the presentation today. So
Our absolute pleasure. Stay tuned. Keep an eye out for the nature-based solution survey projects you're interested in. And if you think of any questions at all, please don't hesitate to, whether it's about nature-based solutions or about the modeling, please don't hesitate to reach out. I think the chat's disabled. I don't think I can put my email address, but just email Kimberly. She'll forward.
Yes. Yes, definitely. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
And stay tuned. So we're going to have another meeting.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. Oh, you want to do that with the recording and everything.
Does anyone have any questions for us while you're here?
No.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.